they are, researchers in deception cues, and I'm also one of you. I work with Mark Frank a lot. We do microexpressions and emotion. I've even done some work on indirect deception detection like Leanne has. But today, I wanted to mix it up a little bit, and I wanted to talk to you about something else that I've been doing, which is not exactly about deception detection, but that's looking at some of the antecedents, especially when it comes to individual characteristics, to somebody making the decision to lie. The inspiration for this was a few years ago. I went to, when I was still a graduate student, I went to a summer school in Geneva. It was organized by the Swiss Center for Affective Sciences. And what was so awesome about that summer school was how many different researchers there were from different disciplines. There were philosophers there, and there were like developmental psychologists and everybody. And I realized that, as deception researchers, we kind of have a really narrow focus on what we do, and we haven't yet taken into account what everybody else is doing in different disciplines. We had Dan come and speak the other day, and that was really awesome to see because of his different perspective when it comes to deception. So today's talk, I don't think it's that much about my study and the data that I want to present to you. That's sort of beside the point. It's more to inspire you to think about how we can work in a more interdisciplinary way when it comes to deception. Can you hear me? Okay. So here are the kind of three broad areas that I wanted to join up for you today. As an emotion researcher, I've always mostly played in psychology and looking at things like empathy. And I've looked at a lot of research about how our empathy is basically a function of all these emotional processes, including from when we're very young. However, again, at this wonderful summer school, I was also exposed to the world of anthropologists, political scientists, and philosophers that also look at things like morality. And they've developed some really interesting ideas whose main goal was probably to describe differences in morality between cultures and groups and societies. But I wanted to kind of bring it back to the individual and talk about morality in terms of an individual's decision to lie. And this decision to lie, of course, brings me to the third major area that I'll be covering, and that's behavioral economics. So again, a lot of what Dan Ariely and people involved in that field are doing is they look at the what of lying. So, what influences somebody's decision to cheat a little bit more or a little bit less in a particular context or situation. So the story generally is that this is how moral behavior develops. And so I hope when I say to you moral behavior that the word deception is also coming in your mind. At the very start, when we're very young, we all have the innate ability to mimic the emotion expressions of others and to kind of feel congruent emotion to those around us. So this rather adorable baby here, you can see in that particular study was able to mimic the expressions of his mother quite well. The idea here is that there's an emotion contagion process. And it's particularly important for moral behavior because when we see somebody else in distress, say we've done something to hurt that person, it actually makes us feel a little bit distressed. So over time, along with theory of mind and the ability to put oneself in the shoes of another person, you see that we start to develop moral rules about how we behave. These rules are not always conscious, and the theories that I talk about today from anthropology and political science are in fact that these are moral intuitions that become developed as a result of this learning process. So take the example of a child. You know how children are, they're very impulsive. Maybe they decide to just throw a rock at somebody. Okay. That person then gets incredibly upset, and the child gets incredibly upset, not because it was unbidden, they just felt this emotion contagion process. And so they start to learn that this behavior is bad and that they shouldn't do it. Over time, they develop a sort of moral intuition that harming other people is bad. And they develop an aversion to performing this kind of behavior. So if I ask any one of you today to pick up a rock and throw it at me, I should hope that many of you would find that a really difficult task to do, unless I provoked you, of course. So that's the story. And what I wanted to do was map this story using all the theory that was kind of available to me from multiple disciplines into studying the decision to lie. So I was focusing on empathy and I was focusing on morality and how they, in a little causal chain, could be some important antecedents to choosing to lie. You don't need to read this. This is just I'm just showing you the task that I used in my studies. I used a task by Gnisi. He's a behavioral economist. He's quite famous, and he uses a deception game where a person has the opportunity to lie to another. So the way it works is there is a pool of money that's going to be divided between the participant and the person that they're playing with, ostensibly. And the participant is the only one who knows what the payouts are between the two different options. In the meantime, the person that they're playing with is the one who makes the decision about what payment option will be selected and how the money will be divvied up. Payment A, this is how it will work. So the participant receives $5 and the other student receives $6, and in payment B, it's the opposite. So in payment B is the one where the participant would be getting more money for themselves. So now's the moment of truth, or lie, as the case may be, no pun intended. So the participant now has to send a message to the other person telling them what the payouts are. So message 1 is the truthful payment, is the truthful message. You tell the other person that payment A will earn you more money than payment B. Okay, you're guiding them to their own benefit. Message 2, of course, is the lie. You're telling them that payment B will earn them more money than payment A. Really, it's you trying to get more money for yourself. It's a very simple task. I shouldn't say that because we actually ran this with undergraduate students, and you would be surprised at how many people just did not understand what all was going on. So a lot of data had to be dumped there. But nonetheless, this is the task. And so here's where we start in the study. I give people this decision. And then from there, once they make the decision, I ask them all these questions about empathy and morality. When it comes to empathy, for a long time, it's kind of been discussed as this really unitary concept that describes, your ability to understand people's emotional and cognitive states. But more recently, there's been some criticism of that approach and the need to kind of look at it in a more nuanced way to understand that empathy is a set of skills, that they're related, but they're also distinct. So there's some objective ways we can measure empathy, like showing people pictures of emotion expressions and asking them, what do you see there? Okay, that's one style, that's one type of empathy. Another type is emotion contagion. So this is more self-reported, and it has to do with how you experience your emotions when you're around other people. So a sample item there is, if somebody I'm talking with begins to cry, I get teary-eyed myself. And then we also use the Baron-Cohen empathy quotient, which is a sort of mixture of those, and it really has a lot to do with theory of mind and how well you understand other people's cognitive and emotional states. So we had both objective and subjective measures because I wanted to see which ones tease out, which ones really come to the fore. For the morality part, I was using a lot of Jonathan Haid's work. So he's the one that developed the moral foundations theory, the idea that individuals, and subsequently, of course, societies, are governed by a fixed set of moral foundations. There's a handful of them. They guide our behavior in everyday life and how we make decisions. There's moral foundations to do with how much importance we place on things like authority or religion. But I was focusing on the moral foundations that have to do with how we treat other people. So the first one I examined was our harm care moral foundation. And so a sample item there is compassion for those suffering is the most crucial virtue. So it's, again, this sensitivity to causing harm to others and being really motivated to avoid as much as possible harm. The fairness and reciprocity one, again, has to do with how we treat other people, but it's, again, to do with whether the behavior that you're about to enact is fair in the context of the situation. So a sample item there is, I think it's morally wrong that rich children inherit a lot of money, while poor children inherit nothing. Okay. So these are the two that I examined, and then I also gave them a bunch of deception scenarios. This was based on work by McLeod and Geneur. And I was mostly interested in self-gain lines as a proof of concept and to link it back to the deception game. But you can also imagine other types of lies. I also included those, including altruistic lies, social acceptance lies, and conflict avoidance lies. And I've given you some examples there of lies in those categories. So what I was seeing, and again, this is not about me, like, it's a very short presentation. I don't want to inundate you with figures and diagrams and that sort of thing. But in terms of the mediation between the empathy factors and how people rate the acceptability of lies that are to do with self-gain, it was this moral foundation of harm and care that was coming in. It wasn't about treating other people fairly. It wasn't about ensuring justice. It was the desire to avoid harm to another person. And it makes sense because, well, it doesn't make sense to me initially because oftentimes a self-gain lie, a lie that you perpetuate in order to gain some benefit to yourself, doesn't necessarily harm another person, and certainly doesn't harm them physically. Yet this pathway was coming through. And then when I tacked on, of course, the lie decision, again, you were seeing an indirect effect. This was based on Bayesian estimation. I used SEM. An indirect effect between the harm care moral foundation and their lie decision. And, of course, the direct effect as expected, between lie acceptability and their decision. So the other fun things that you can do with this kind of research is also ask people about what was going through their mind when they were making the lie decision. And that opens up another world of possibilities for how you could do it. And what I found that was interesting is that, oh, there we go.
Wrap it up as well. Is that okay?
Yeah, sure. There are only some people who imagined this kind of honest person reasoning, whereas some of them were more pragmatic. They were like, well, I didn't want to lie because I don't want to lie to the other person over $1. It's almost like they were, doing a cost-benefit analysis of lying. So I'm just going to skip through this part. So this is what I've been doing in my research, trying to trace this line, trying to study the decision to lie in a more systematic way. I didn't want to just look at, just random personality characteristics. I didn't want to look at other kinds of individual differences. I wanted a more systematic, theoretically sound approach to studying this. So I hope, if nothing else, that what you do today is, after Decepticon, you go and read one piece of work that is outside your field. You don't just focus on the narrow set of colleagues that you work with and the paradigm that you work with, but you try and explore a little bit and see some other work that other people are doing. Okay, thank you. Sorry for running over time.